The crystal dome reflected the light of a dying star. Inside, representatives from across the galaxy sat in silence. The air was heavy with fear. Ambassador Daiho from Earth stood near the back, watching the scene unfold before him. He had been to many council meetings, but this one felt different. This one felt desperate. At the center of the chamber, Thexus stood alone. The Velkari ambassador's insect-like body trembled as he spoke. His voice came through the translator, broken and weary. He had been speaking for nearly an hour, begging for help. Behind him, holographic images showed burning worlds. Cities turned to ash, millions of bodies floating in space. The Ravagers had come 6 months ago. Nobody knew where they came from. They simply appeared at the edge of Velkari space like a plague. Their ships were not made of metal. They were grown, living things that moved through space like a swarm of locusts. They ate everything. Planets, stations, ships, people. They consumed it all and left nothing behind but empty rocks. Thexus showed the council numbers. 2 billion dead. 3 colony worlds gone. The Velkari fleet was down to less than 100 ships. Their military was exhausted. Their soldiers were dying. Their homeworld would fall within weeks, maybe days. He needed help. He needed it now. When Thexus finished speaking, the council chamber fell silent. Daiho watched as the elder species exchanged glances. These were the ancient powers of the galaxy. They had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Surely they would help. The Tellurian representative spoke first. His voice was calm, almost cold. His people had treaty obligations in another sector. They could not spare forces. The crystalline accord came next. Their ships were needed elsewhere. They expressed sympathy but offered nothing. One by one, each species made excuses. They would not fight the Ravagers. Daiho understood why. The Ravagers were terrifying. They did not negotiate. They did not surrender. They simply killed and consumed. Fighting them meant accepting massive casualties. The elder species had grown comfortable. They had not fought a real war in centuries. They calculated risk and reward like accountants. The Velkari were not worth the cost. Thexus stood in the center of the chamber as the last species declined. His compound eyes seemed to lose their light. He had come here hoping for salvation. Instead, he found only empty words and careful apologies. His people would die and the galaxy would watch from a safe distance. Daiho felt something stir in his chest. It was anger, pure and hot. He had seen this before, back on Earth. The strong abandoning the weak, the comfortable ignoring the desperate. He had sworn never to be that person again. He had sworn that humanity would be different. He stepped forward. His movement caught everyone's attention. The elder species looked at him with mild curiosity. Earth was young, barely 30 years in the council. Humans were newcomers, barely worth noticing. What could they possibly offer? Daiho walked to the center and stood beside Thexus. He looked at the Velkari ambassador, then turned to face the council. His voice was steady and clear. Earth would answer the call. Earth would send its military. Earth would fight the Ravagers. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species laughed. Others expressed concern. The Tellurian representative Vexilon stood and spoke loudly. He warned that humanity was making a terrible mistake. The Ravagers would destroy them. Earth's military was small and inexperienced. They had never faced anything like this. They would die for nothing. Daiho listened to the warnings. He did not interrupt. When Vexilon finished, Daiho spoke again. His words were simple but carried weight. Humanity had faced extinction before. Long before they reached the stars, humans had nearly destroyed themselves in wars. They knew what it meant to stare into the abyss. They knew what it took to survive. He explained that other species saw only numbers and calculations. They saw acceptable losses and strategic value. But humans saw something different. They saw people who needed help. They saw a civilization on the edge of death. And they had learned long ago that you do not abandon those who need you, no matter the cost. The council remained skeptical. The Crystalline Accord's representative, an artificial intelligence named Axiom, spoke next. It analyzed Earth's military strength. Earth had perhaps 500 warships. Good ships, but nothing compared to the elder fleets. The Ravagers had tens of thousands of bioships. The math was simple. Earth would lose. Daiho smiled at that. He told Axiom that humans had never been very good at math when it came to war. They did not fight because the odds were good. They fought because it was right. And sometimes that made all the difference. Thexus looked at Deho with something close to hope. He asked if Earth truly understood what they were promising. This was not a small conflict. This was a fight for survival against an enemy that showed no mercy. Many humans would die. Deho placed a hand on the Velkhari's chitinous shoulder. He told Thexus that humanity understood perfectly. They knew the cost. They accepted it. Because when someone asks for help, you do not turn away. You stand with them. You fight with them. Even if it means you might not come home. The Council voted to authorize Earth's intervention. It was more of a formality than anything else. Nobody expected the humans to succeed. They expected Earth's fleet to arrive, fight bravely, and be destroyed. It would be a noble gesture. A footnote in history. Nothing more. As the meeting ended and representatives filed out, Thexus stood with Deho. The Velkhari ambassador thanked him. His voice was thick with emotion. Deho told him there was no need for thanks. Humanity made a promise. They would keep it. That was what humans did. That night, Deho sent a message back to Earth. It was brief and to the point. He told the military command that the Velkhari needed help. He told them the situation was desperate. He told them that the galaxy was watching to see what humanity would do. Within hours, Earth's response came back. Admiral Heejin of the Fifth Fleet sent a single sentence. It was all that needed to be said. The fleet was already preparing to move. They would be there in 2 weeks. Deho stood alone in his quarters, looking out at the stars. He thought about the soldiers who would soon be fighting and dying in a war that was not theirs. He thought about the families who would lose loved ones. He thought about the terrible price of doing what was right, but he also thought about the Velkhari children who might live because of this decision. He thought about the billions of lives that might be saved. He thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had forgotten how to care. The elder species would learn soon enough. Humanity was not like them. Humans did not calculate acceptable losses. They did not weigh strategic value against moral obligation. When they made a promise, they kept it, even if it cost them everything, especially if it cost them everything. That was what made them dangerous. That was what made them human. Deep beneath the moon's surface, Admiral Heejin stood before a wall of screens. Each one showed a different part of Earth's military preparing for war. She had been in command for 15 years, but this was different. This was not a border dispute or a pirate raid. This was war against an enemy that existed only to destroy. The Fifth Fleet was Earth's largest military force. 20 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small city. 40 destroyers fast and deadly. 10 carrier groups with thousands of fighters. And on the ground, 50,000 soldiers ready to deploy. It was an impressive force by human standards. But the Ravagers had destroyed species with far more. Heejin studied the tactical display. The Velkhari system was 3 weeks away at maximum speed. The Ravagers had already consumed 3 colony worlds. Their swarm numbered in the tens of thousands. Every projection showed the same result. Earth would lose. But Heejin had not survived 2 decades of military service by trusting projections. She called her command staff together. Men and women who had served with her through countless battles. They looked tired already, and the war had not even begun. She told them the truth. Many of them would not come home. But the Velkhari would survive because of their sacrifice. That had to be enough. The Galactic Council had sent observers to watch Earth's preparations. They wanted to see what humanity would bring to the fight. What they saw confused them. Human ships were not elegant like Tellurian vessels. They were not ancient like crystalline constructs. They were brutal, functional machines built for one purpose: violence. The human dreadnoughts carried weapons that most species had abandoned centuries ago. Railguns that fired solid metal slugs at incredible speeds. Nuclear missiles that could crack a moon in half. Chemical explosives that could turn a ship into shrapnel. The elder species had moved to energy weapons long ago, considering them more civilized. Humans had never cared about civilized. One observer, a Tellurian military analyst named Corvin, watched a firing test. A human dreadnought launched a single railgun round at a target asteroid. The impact was catastrophic. The asteroid simply ceased to exist, turned to dust in an instant. Corvin sent a report back to his superiors. The humans have weaponized extinction. They have taken the tools they once used to destroy themselves and pointed them outward. But weapons were only part of the equation. The observers also watched human soldiers train. They expected to see rigid formations and careful tactics. Instead, they saw something that looked like organized chaos. Soldiers moving independently, making decisions without orders, adapting to changing situations in real time. Captain Minho commanded the Wraith Brigade, Earth's elite special forces. His unit consisted of 50 soldiers, each one a volunteer who had undergone cybernetic enhancement. Metal limbs that could crush steel, neural implants that gave superhuman reflexes, eyes that could see in complete darkness. They were part human, part machine, and completely lethal. Minho gathered his team in the training hall. He did not give inspiring speeches. He simply told them the truth. The Ravagers would try to overwhelm them with numbers. They would attack from every direction. They would show no mercy. So the brigade would show none either. They would fight with everything they had. And if they died, they would take as many enemies with them as possible. Among his soldiers was Lieutenant Jiwoo. She was young, only 25, but she had already seen enough death to last a lifetime. 5 years ago, pirates had attacked her home station. She had watched her family die while security forces arrived too late. She volunteered for the Wraith Brigade the next day. Her left arm was now metal, engraved with the names of everyone she had lost. She would never be helpless again. In the science division, Dr. Yuna worked day and night studying the enemy. The Velkari had provided tissue samples from dead Ravagers. Yuna examined them under microscopes, ran genetic analyses, searched for any weakness. What she found was disturbing. The Ravagers were not individuals. They were parts of a whole, connected through a biological network. Kill one and the rest adapted. Kill 1,000 and they learned. But Yuna found something else. The swarm had coordination nodes, larger organisms that directed the smaller ones. They were like commanders but biological. If those nodes could be destroyed, the swarm would lose cohesion. They would still be dangerous, but they would be vulnerable. She sent her findings to Admiral Hyejin immediately. Hyejin read the report 3 times. This was what they needed. Not a way to destroy every Ravager, but a way to break their coordination, make them fight as individuals instead of a unified force. It would still be a brutal battle, but at least now they had a strategy. The day of departure arrived. The Fifth Fleet assembled in high orbit above Earth. Thousands of ships from massive carriers to small patrol craft. They formed a spearhead pattern, ready to punch through space itself. On Earth below, billions watched the broadcast. Some prayed, some wept. All understood that many of those ships would never return. Hyejin sat in the command chair of her flagship, the Indomitable. The ship's name felt appropriate. She opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. Her message was brief. They were going to war. They were going to face an enemy that wanted to exterminate an entire species. Some of them would die, but they would not fail. Earth had made a promise. Earth would keep it. The fleet engaged their hyperspace drives. One by one, the ships vanished from normal space, leaving Earth behind. They would not return for months. Maybe never, but that did not matter. They had a job to do. As the last ship disappeared, Hyejin recorded a personal message. It was for her daughter, Minseo, who was 15 and would be 16 by the time this war ended. If it ended. The message was simple. She told Minseo that she loved her. She told her to be strong. And she told her that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. Back on the Galactic Council station, the elder species watched the departure with mixed feelings. Some admired human courage. Others thought it was pointless bravery that would lead only to death. The Crystalline Accord's AI calculated updated probabilities. Earth's fleet had a 12% chance of victory. Those were not good odds. But there was one thing the calculations could not account for. One variable that did not fit into any equation. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not retreat when logic said to retreat. They did not surrender when survival demanded surrender. They fought until they won or until they were dead. And sometimes that made all the difference. In the Velkari system, Thexus received word that Earth's fleet had departed. He stood on his homeworld, looking up at a sky filled with Ravager ships. The cities were burning. The military was breaking. His people had days left, maybe hours. But now there was something else. Something he had not felt in months, hope. It was a small thing, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. The humans were coming. They had promised to help. And somehow, despite everything, Thexus believed they would keep that promise. He did not know why. He had only met Ambassador Deho once, but there was something in the human's eyes. A certainty. A determination that transcended logic. When humans said they would do something, they did it, even if it killed them. The Fifth Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velkari system. What they saw made even the most experienced officers fall silent. 3 worlds burned in the distance. Their atmospheres were gone, stripped away by the Ravagers. Millions of bodies floated in the void, frozen monuments to extinction. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers. The remains of orbital stations and defense platforms. Admiral Heejin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her hands gripping the command console. She had seen war before. She had watched cities burn and ships explode. But this was different. This was not war. This was extermination. The Ravagers did not conquer. They erased. The remaining Velkari fleet appeared on scanners. Less than 100 ships damaged and desperate. They held a line around the homeworld, the last barrier between the Ravagers and complete genocide. Admiral Heejin opened communications with their commander, Fleet Commander Xerix. The Velkari's voice came through crackling with static and exhaustion. Xerix told them the situation. His forces were down to 30% strength. Ammunition was running low. Crews were dying from exhaustion and injuries. They had fought for 6 months without relief. They could not hold much longer. Perhaps another day. Maybe less. If the humans had come to witness the end, they understood. But there was nothing left to save. Heejin listened to every word. Then she gave her response. Her voice was steady and clear. The Velkari forces were to fall back to secondary positions. Earth was taking the front line. They had not come to witness death. They had come to prevent it. The human fleet moved forward, positioning themselves between the Velkari homeworld and the advancing Ravager swarm. 20 dreadnoughts formed the center line. Destroyers spread out on the flanks. Carriers held back, ready to launch their fighters. It was a classic defensive formation, something any species would recognize. But what came next was pure human innovation. The Ravagers appeared like a living nightmare. Tens of thousands of bioships, each one grown rather than built. They ranged from small fighter-sized creatures to massive organisms the size of cities. Their hulls were covered in chitin and bone. Acid dripped from their weapons. They moved together like a school of fish, synchronized and deadly. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They simply came forward to kill and consume. Dr. Yuna worked frantically at her station scanning the swarm. She found what she was looking for, 3 massive organisms embedded within the swarm, each one pulsing with bioluminescent light, the coordination nodes. She transmitted their positions to every ship in the fleet. These were the targets. Kill them, and the swarm would fragment. The Ravagers crashed into Earth's line like a tsunami hitting a wall. The human dreadnoughts opened fire. Railgun rounds streaked through space at impossible speeds. Each impact tore through multiple bioships, leaving trails of destruction. Nuclear missiles detonated in brilliant flashes, vaporizing everything within kilometers. The void lit up with violence. But for every Ravager destroyed, more surged forward. They swarmed the human ships, latching onto hulls with clawed appendages. Acid burned through armor. Bioplasma weapons melted metal. The dreadnought Valiant took a direct hit to its engine section and began to list. The destroyer Perseverance found itself surrounded by fighter organisms. Captain Taijin commanded the Perseverance. He watched as Ravager fighters attached themselves to his hull, trying to bore through the armor. He made a split-second decision. He fired every maneuvering thruster at once, spinning his ship at dangerous speeds. The centrifugal force tore the creatures away. Point defense lasers finished the job. It was desperate and brutal, but it worked. Above the chaos, carrier groups launched their fighters. Thousands of small ships poured into the battle. Among them was Lieutenant Sora, a pilot with 40 confirmed kills and a reputation for insane bravery. She led her squadron straight toward the nearest coordination node. The path was thick with Ravager defenders, but Sora did not slow down. Her neural implant connected directly to her fighter's systems. She did not think about dodging. She simply moved. Her reflexes were faster than conscious thought. Bioplasma fire filled the space around her, but she weaved through it like water flowing around rocks. Her squadron followed, trusting her completely. They reached the coordination node. The massive organism was protected by hundreds of smaller bioships, But Sora had already calculated the attack run. She dumped her entire payload of kinetic torpedoes directly into the creature's core. The explosions tore through its body. The bioluminescent pulses flickered and died. The first node was down. Immediately, the swarm's movements became less coordinated. The Ravagers near the destroyed node began acting independently, losing their synchronized attacks. Admiral Heejin saw the change and knew this was their chance. She ordered the dreadnoughts to advance. The order surprised everyone, including her own officers. Advance into the swarm? That was suicide. But Heejin understood something that the Ravagers did not. They expected their enemies to defend, to hold position, to wait for death. Humans did not wait. Humans attacked. The dreadnoughts pushed forward, their weapons firing continuously. They drove deep into the swarm's center, and the Ravagers, confused by this tactic, tried to surround them. That was exactly what Heejin wanted. She signaled the second wave. Carrier groups that had been holding in reserve suddenly appeared behind the Ravager swarm, having jumped through hyperspace. They caught the enemy in a trap. Fighters and bombers swarmed from both sides. The Ravagers found themselves surrounded, caught between the hammer and the anvil. The battle raged for 18 hours. Every human ship took damage. Every crew member pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. The destroyer Defiant lost its entire forward section but kept fighting. The dreadnought Justice suffered a reactor breach and had to be abandoned. Thousands of fighters were destroyed. But the humans did not stop. Lieutenant Sora's squadron eliminated the second coordination node. Then the third. With all three nodes destroyed, the Ravager swarm lost cohesion completely. They stopped acting like a unified force and became thousands of individual threats, dangerous but no longer overwhelming. The human fleet pressed the advantage mercilessly. Finally, the Ravagers broke. The swarm began to retreat, pulling back into deep space. They left behind thousands of dead bioships floating in the void. The battle was over. The humans had won, but victory had a price. 3 dreadnoughts were gone, 7 destroyers destroyed, hundreds of fighters lost, 4,000 humans dead, their bodies floating in the black void of space. Admiral Heejin ordered a moment of silence for the fallen. Every ship in the fleet went quiet, honoring those who would never go home. Then Heejin made sure the entire galaxy heard what happened. She broadcast a message on all channels. Earth had lost 4,000 people. They mourned every single one. But they did not break. The line held, and it would continue to hold no matter what came next. On the Velkari homeworld, Thexus watched the battle from the surface. He saw the human ships fight with a ferocity that defied logic. He saw them take losses that would have made any other species retreat. And he saw them win. For the first time in 6 months, the sky above his world was clear of Ravager ships. Across the galaxy, the elder species watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. The humans had not just survived. They had driven the Ravagers back. The Crystalline Accord's AI revised all its calculations. The probability of human victory was no longer 12%. It was 40% and rising. And somewhere in the cold logic of that artificial mind, something almost like respect began to form. The orbital battle was won, but the war was not over. The Ravagers had established hives on the surface of Velkara Prime, massive organic structures that grew like cancer across the southern continent. Inside these hives, the Ravagers bred new warriors and processed resources. As long as the hives existed, the planet would never be safe. Captain Minho stood in the drop bay of the assault carrier Hammer. Around him, the 50 members of the Wraith Brigade checked their equipment. Each soldier wore powered armor, reinforced with composite materials that could stop most weapons. But armor was only part of their protection. These soldiers had been enhanced. Cybernetic limbs, neural implants, enhanced reflexes. They were as much machine as human now. Minho addressed his team. His words were simple. The primary hive was 5 kilometers from their landing zone. They would drop in pods, regroup on the surface, and advance to the target. Once there, they would plant explosives in the hive's core and destroy it. The mission was straightforward. The execution would be hell. Lieutenant Jiwoo listened to the briefing. Her cybernetic left arm hummed with power as she clenched her fist. The names etched into the metal caught the light. Her mother, her father, her brother, all dead because she had been too weak to save them. She would never be weak again. The Ravagers would learn what it meant to face humanity's fury. The drop pods launched, 50 armored coffins filled with soldiers and shock gel. Hurled through the atmosphere at terminal velocity, the pods shook violently as they hit air resistance. Through the small window, Minho watched the surface approach at terrifying speed. Then impact. The pod slammed into the ground hard enough to crack concrete. The gel absorbed most of the shock, but it still felt like getting hit by a truck. Minho's pod opened. He stepped out into a nightmare. The ground was covered in biofilm, a living carpet of Ravager tissue that pulsed with organic activity. The air was thick with spores. His armor's filters caught them, but he could smell the decay even through the seals. In the distance, the hive rose like a mountain of flesh and bone. The brigade regrouped quickly. All 50 members had survived the drop. That was good luck. They formed into squads and began the advance. The landscape was alien and hostile. What had once been a Velkari city was now half consumed by Ravager corruption. Buildings twisted into organic shapes, streets covered in the creeping biofilm. Everything was wrong. They had not gone far when the first attack came. Ravager warriors dropped from the corrupted buildings. These creatures were built for combat. 6 limbs tipped with blade-like claws, armored carapaces that could deflect most bullets, and a complete lack of fear. They attacked immediately, screaming through mandibles that dripped acid. Lieutenant Jiwoo took point. Her enhanced reflexes gave her a split-second advantage. When a warrior dropped from above, she caught it with her cybernetic arm. The metal fingers crushed through the creature's primary neural cluster. It spasmed and died. She threw the body aside and moved forward. Around her, the brigade fought with coordinated precision. The Wraith Brigade's weapons were brutal. Plasma cutters designed for industrial work, repurposed to slice through Ravager chitin like paper. Explosive charges that could blow a warrior apart. And when weapons failed, they had knives in their bare hands. Sometimes the simplest tools were the most effective. They pushed deeper into the corrupted city. Every street brought more warriors. Every building held ambush points. The brigade took casualties. Private Kyung lost his right leg to a warrior's claw. Sergeant Borum took acid burns across her back. But they kept moving. The mission came first. Always. After 3 hours of fighting, they reached the hive entrance. It was a sphincter-like opening that contracted and expanded rhythmically. Like breathing, the sight made several soldiers pause. This was not a structure. It was alive. They were about to enter the body of a monster. Minho led the way inside. The corridors were lined with organic material that oozed moisture. The walls pulsed. The floor shifted under their boots. Nutrient sacs hung from the ceiling and embryonic warriors floated in amniotic fluid. The air was hot and humid, filled with the chemical stench of alien biology. This was the inside of a living nightmare. They followed Dr. Yuna's analysis, moving deeper toward the core. The hive's neural cluster was the target. Destroy it, and every Ravager on the continent would lose coordination. But the hive knew they were there. Warriors poured from side passages in waves. The brigade was forced to fight for every meter. Sergeant Dowan, the team's demolitions expert, took a hit. A warrior's acid spray burned through his armor, searing his shoulder and chest. The pain was incredible, but he forced himself to keep moving. He was carrying the charges. If he fell, the mission failed. And failure meant millions of Velkari would die. They reached the core chamber. It was vast, like a cathedral made of flesh. The neural cluster hung suspended in the center, 3 stories tall and pulsing with sickly bioluminescence. Smaller organisms tended to it, maintaining the connections that spread throughout the hive. This was the brain. This was the heart. This had to die. Minho ordered Doan to set the charges while the rest of the team provided covering fire. Warriors flooded into the chamber from every entrance. The brigade formed a defensive circle, their weapons firing continuously. Jiwoo's plasma cutter sliced through warrior after warrior. Her cybernetic arm never tired. She would hold this line until the last breath left her body. Doan worked through the pain, placing charges at key points around the neural cluster. His training took over. Muscle memory guided his burned hands. 1 charge, 2, 3. He was almost done when his armor's warning system screamed. Every warrior on the continent was converging on this position. The hive knew what they were doing. Minho saw the tactical display. Thousands of warriors all heading toward them. They had minutes at best. He ordered the brigade to fall back. They would detonate remotely once they reached minimum safe distance. But then Dowan looked at his detonator. The device was damaged, melted by acid. Remote detonation was not possible. Someone would have to stay and trigger it manually. The brigade understood immediately. This was a one-way mission now. Someone had to die. Minho opened his mouth to give the order, to make the decision himself. But Dowan was faster. He looked at his captain and smiled behind his cracked visor. His voice was steady. "Tell my family I was not afraid. Tell them I died so others could live." Then Dowan shoved Minho toward the exit with surprising strength. He activated his armor's emergency beacon, broadcasting his position to every Ravager in range. They would come for him. All of them. And that would buy his team the time they needed to escape. Minho wanted to argue. Wanted to order Dowan to come with them. But he knew the truth. This was the only way. He grabbed Jiwoo, who was screaming Dowan's name, and dragged her toward the exit. The brigade ran. Behind them they could hear Dowan fighting. His plasma cutter firing. His voice roaring defiance. And then the explosion. The blast was visible from orbit. The entire hive collapsed inward, millions of tons of organic material imploding into the destroyed core. The shockwave flattened everything within a kilometer. Thousands of Ravager warriors died instantly, and the biofilm across the continent began to wither, turning gray and brittle. The Wraith Brigade reached the extraction point. They were down to 44 members. 6 had died, including Dowan. But the mission was complete. The primary hive was destroyed. Velkari ground forces, emboldened by the human success, began pushing back the remaining Ravagers across the planet. Minho stood in the rain as the dropships arrived. He thought about Dowan, about the others who had not made it. War was horror. There was no glory in watching friends die. But sometimes horror was the price of saving lives. Sometimes sacrifice was the only answer. Across the galaxy, footage of the ground campaign spread. Other species watched humans fight in conditions that would break most warriors. They watched soldiers with metal limbs and enhanced bodies charge into living nightmares. They watched humans die so aliens could live. And they began to understand. Humanity's strength came from their willingness to sacrifice everything. For those who needed protection. That was what made them terrifying. That was what made them heroes. 3 months had passed since the battle began. The Ravager threat to the Velkari system was over. The swarm had retreated into deep space, their coordination broken, their hives destroyed. The Velkari homeworld was scarred but alive. The surviving colonies began to rebuild. For the first time in half a year, the Velkari people could look at the sky without seeing death approaching. But victory had come at a terrible price. The Fifth Fleet limped back toward Earth carrying its dead. 7,000 humans had died in the campaign, 7,000 names to be added to the memorial wall on Luna, 7,000 families who would never see their loved ones again. Admiral Heejin sat in her quarters, holding a list of every fallen soldier. She had memorized each name. When the fleet reached Earth orbit, Heejin did not celebrate. She visited families, every single one. She stood in living rooms and told parents that their children had died heroes. She looked into the eyes of widows and widowers and explained that their sacrifice had saved millions. Some families thanked her. Others wept. A few screamed at her. She accepted it all. This was her responsibility. Her burden to carry. Captain Minho was promoted to major. They gave him the Stellar Cross, humanity's highest military honor. The medal ceremony was held in the Grand Hall with thousands watching. But when they placed the medal in his hand, it felt like nothing. Empty medal. Dowan was dead. 6 others from his team were dead. What did a medal mean compared to that? He gave a short speech. His words were blunt. They were not heroes. They were soldiers who did what needed to be done. Do not honor them with parades and medals. Honor them by remembering why they died. Honor them by making sure their sacrifice meant something. Then he walked off the stage, leaving the audience in stunned silence. Across the galaxy, the Velkari campaign changed everything. The elder species had watched humans fight with a determination they had forgotten existed. They had seen a young species lose thousands of lives to save aliens they barely knew. The calculations and careful risk assessments suddenly seemed hollow. The humans had done what none of them were willing to do. Earth was invited to join the Galactic Security Council. It was a position of tremendous power, previously reserved only for ancient civilizations. Ambassador Deho received the invitation personally. He accepted on behalf of humanity. But he made one thing clear. Earth did not want power for its own sake. They wanted to ensure that no species would ever be abandoned again. He addressed the expanded council in the same crystal chamber where Thexus had first pleaded for help. His words were measured but carried undeniable weight. Humanity had answered the call because it was right. Not for glory, not for territory, not for influence. They did it because someone needed help, and helping was what humans did. That was what Earth offered the galaxy: protection, partnership, a promise that they would never stand by while others suffered. The Crystalline Accord's AI, Axiom, processed this statement for several minutes. Its conclusion was fascinating. Humanity's unpredictability was both their greatest weakness and their greatest strength. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They calculated paths to victory regardless of cost. In a galaxy grown comfortable with measured responses, humanity represented something dangerous: absolute commitment. On Velcara Prime, the Velcari erected a monument. It stood in the center of their rebuilt capital, a towering structure of crystal and steel. Engraved on its surface were the names of every human who died defending their world. 7,000 names. At the base was a single phrase in both Velcari and English. When they pleaded for aid, Earth responded with its fiercest warriors. Thexus stood before the monument during the dedication ceremony. Ambassador Deho stood beside him. The Velcari's translator conveyed profound gratitude. Humanity had given them more than military support. They had given hope when there was none. They had shown that the galaxy still had those who would stand against darkness. Deho's response was simple. The galaxy was vast and full of threats, but as long as humanity drew breath, those who needed protection would have it. That was not a threat to their enemies. It was a promise to their friends. Life moved forward for those who survived. Admiral Hegan spent months in therapy, processing the trauma of losing so many under her command. Eventually, she returned to active duty with a renewed perspective. Victory was important, but so was remembering the cost. She established a foundation to support families of fallen soldiers. Those who gave everything would never be forgotten. Lieutenant Jiwoo left the Wraith Brigade after the campaign. She had seen enough war for one lifetime. Instead, she became an instructor at Earth's military academy. She taught the next generation about courage and sacrifice. She told her students the truth. War was horror. They would be asked to do terrible things in the name of peace. They needed to understand why before they pulled the trigger. Dr. Yuna continued her xenobiology research, but her focus changed. She wanted to find ways to communicate with hostile species before conflict became inevitable. Understanding alien life was the key to preventing future wars. Her published paper on Ravager biology became required reading at every galactic university. Maybe knowledge could save lives that weapons could not. Lieutenant Sora, the fighter pilot who destroyed the first coordination node, retired from combat duty. She became a test pilot for next-generation fighters. She carried a photo of her squadron in her cockpit, taken before the campaign. Half of those faces never made it home, but their sacrifice ensured that others would fly freely. Years passed. The Velcari campaign became a turning point in galactic history. When the hegemony of Three Suns faced a similar threat years later, they did not hesitate to call for Earth's aid. When the Crystalline Accord discovered a forgotten colony under siege, they requested human military advisors. Humanity became known throughout the stars, not as conquerors, not as exploiters, but as protectors. New recruits in Earth's military academies studied the Velcari campaign as a case study. The tactics, the sacrifices, the victories and the losses. The names of those who fell became legendary. Sergeant Dowan's final stand was taught in every strategy class. His last words were carved into the wall of the academy. "Tell my family I was not afraid." The galaxy learned a fundamental truth about humanity. They were not the strongest species. They were not the oldest or the wisest. Their technology was good, but not exceptional. Their numbers were modest. But when they made a promise, when they committed to protecting the innocent, they became unstoppable, not by superior firepower, not by ancient knowledge, but by sheer determination. The elder species had grown comfortable. They had forgotten what it meant to truly fight for something. They calculated risk and reward like businessmen. But humans remembered. They carried within them the memory of their own near extinction. They knew what it meant to stare into the abyss, and they had decided long ago that they would never let others fall into that darkness if they could prevent it. A decade after the Velcari campaign, Ambassador Deho stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber. He was older now, his hair gray, his face lined with the weight of years. A new crisis had emerged on the far side of the galaxy. A species called the Korthans faced extinction at the hands of resource pirates. Their ambassador stood where Thexus had stood 10 years before, pleading for help. The elder species began their familiar calculations, weighing costs against benefits, risk against reward, strategic value versus moral obligation. But before they could speak, Deho stood. His voice carried through the crystal chamber, strong and clear despite his age. "Earth will answer your call." The words echoed in the silence. They were simple words, 5 syllables, but they carried the weight of 7,000 graves. They carried the promise of a species that had learned the hard way what it meant to stand for something. They carried humanity's absolute commitment to one simple principle. When someone needs help, you help them. No matter the cost, the Korthan ambassador began to weep. Not from despair but from hope, because they understood what those words meant. Earth was coming. Humans were coming. And when humans made a promise, they kept it, even if it meant sending their fiercest warriors into hell itself. Back on Earth, a new generation of soldiers prepared for deployment. They were young and strong and afraid. But they had studied the Velkari campaign. They knew about Sergeant Dowan. They knew about the 7,000 who never came home. And they knew why those people had died. Not for glory, not for power, but because it was right. Major Minho, now teaching at the academy, watched the new recruits board their transport ships. He saw the same determination in their eyes that he had seen in Dowan's, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for people they had never met. It terrified him. It also filled him with pride. This was humanity's legacy, not conquest or domination, but protection. When the galaxy pleaded for aid, Earth responded with its fiercest warriors, not because it was easy, not because it was profitable, but because someone had to stand between the innocent and the darkness, and humans had decided long ago that they would be that someone. The elder species watched humanity's continued commitment with growing respect. Some still thought humans were reckless. Others believed they were too willing to sacrifice.